Hey, welcome back to MetFlex and Chill. This is Rachel Gregory, your host, and today is a Friday Q&A episode. So before we dive into the questions, I have a few announcements today. So the first announcement is super exciting. The Keto For Women do-it-yourself program is now open for enrollment. I've had many people asking for a program that can be done on their own. There's usually, it's been a live program in the past, and we've had many iterations in the past. Right now, I'm not sure when the next live round will be, but by popular demand, I have created a do-it-yourself program, which involves pretty much all of the same material and basically everything that's involved in the live program, except there's no live Q&A calls each week, but you do get access to all the previous Q&A recordings, which have tons and tons of questions and answers that are very, very valuable. And yeah, so the Keto For Women program is now live, the do-it-yourself program. So I will link the link to sign up if you're interested in the show notes, or you can just go to metflexlife.com/keto-for-women. All of the information is up there for what's included in the program. You can check out the course curriculum. You can check out reviews from previous women who have gone through the program, as well as their transformations and much more. So definitely check that out if you're interested. So that's the first announcement. Second announcement is the Active Stacks giveaway winners have been chosen. So last month, the sponsor of the podcast was Active Stacks, and we had a giveaway. So 3 winners receive both a carton of vanilla protein powder and a carton of chocolate protein powder. So I chose those winners randomly off of the iTunes review, and I have the 3 names here. So these are the iTunes, like your iTunes username. I'm just going to spell them out. If you won, definitely make sure to send me an email. My email is rachel@metflexlife.com with your full name and your shipping info so we can get you your prizes. So the winners are, the first winner is AEH008. That's the username for the first winner. The second one is Megher2, so MEGHER2. And the third winner is Loveland2031. So if any of those are your username, you've won the Active Stacks giveaway. And you can send me an email, again, rachel@metflexlife.com with your full name and your shipping info so I can get you your protein powder. All right, last announcement. So this month's podcast, or this month's Q&A episodes are sponsored by Ketobrick and Livesavage Apparel. So Ketobrick has sponsored the podcast in the past. If you don't know what Ketobricks are, they're basically shelf-stable meal replacement bars that are made with super high-quality ingredients. They have different options available. 100% grass-fed whey options, vegan-friendly options. They're meal replacement bars, but they can actually be melted down into little fat bombs, which is what I use them for. They have tons of different flavors. So they are sponsoring the podcast. Ketobrick, my friends Robert Sykes and Crystal Sykes are the owners of this company. Amazing people. And they also have another company, which is their apparel company called Livesavage Apparel. And honestly, it's probably one of the highest quality apparel companies that I've ever worn. So I have their t-shirts, I have their sweatshirts, their leggings. They have tons of stuff. It's super, super high quality material that they use. They do it all in-house. And so they are also sponsoring the podcast. So it's both of their companies. If you want to check them out, I will link the link in the show notes to their website. It will bring you to the Ketobrick website. And then if you look at the top menu bar, there's an apparel tab. You can click on that and check out all of their different apparel. And I believe they do have a launch coming up during February. So I'll give you more info about that next week. But definitely check them out. And thank you for the sponsorship for the month of, February, from Ketobrick and Livesavage Apparel. All right, that's all I got for you. Let's get into the questions for today. All right, let's jump into the questions today. Just a reminder, these questions are coming from readers of the Friday Flex newsletter. So if you are not signed up for the Friday Flex, you should be. So I will link that in the show notes to sign up, or you can just go to metflexlife.com/newsletter and sign up for my weekly newsletter. All right, so the first question is from Kim. So she asked, how much muscle is necessary for health and longevity? I am 50 years old. I have been following a progressive overload program for a while. Sometimes I feel very stressed with life and wonder if it would be better for me to switch to yoga. If I only have money and time to commit to one thing, is yoga enough? Or how much lifting in general is required to age and hopefully avoid sarcopenia? Hope that makes sense. Thank you for all you do. Love your podcast and the information you provide. Well, I really appreciate you listening to the podcast, Kim, and being signed up for the weekly newsletter. And this is a really great question. So I'm not sure exact numbers in terms of, how much muscle is necessary from like an exact proportion standpoint, but the research shows us time and time again that two of the best predictors for living a long life are lean muscle mass and leg strength. So in general, the more muscular you are and the stronger you are, the longer you're going to live. We have tons of research that shows that, and it just makes sense, right? The stronger you are, the better ability you'll have to age gracefully. And we know that lifting weights improves and also helps to preserve a number of the areas that tend to degrade as we age. So things like bone density, functional strength, balance, those types of things. Obviously, that's part of the cycle of life. As we age, those things tend to degrade, but you can mitigate some of that if you are stronger and if you have more muscle mass. So muscle mass is very, very important. So again, I don't know exact numbers, but we do know that, if you do want to keep your muscles and build muscle, you have to challenge them. So you have to, like Kim mentioned, follow a progressive overload program. And we actually, I went into a little bit of the studies with this because I wanted to get a little bit more info. And we have studies that actually shown that just 1 hour of resistance exercise each week can lead to decreases in all-cause mortality risk. So that's 1 hour, which is pretty cool. So I will link that study in the show notes if you're interested. We also have another study on 90-year-olds, and the conclusion of this study showed that after doing specific training for 12 weeks, people over the age of 90 improved their strength, power, and muscle mass. And this was reflected in an increase in their walking speed, a greater capacity to get out of their chairs, an improvement in their balance, a significant reduction in the incidence of falls, a significant improvement in muscle power, and mass in the lower limbs. So this just shows us that no matter how old you are or what age you are, you can continue to build muscle, right? You just have to give yourself the proper conditions to do that, which would be making sure that you are obviously resistance training to some degree, and also eating a good amount of protein. So protein is a big piece of this as well. As we age, we tend to need more protein. So that is super, super important along with resistance training. And so to answer the second half of this question, Kim asked, if I only have money and time to commit to one thing, is yoga enough? So what I would say is, instead of, committing to just yoga, I would try to kind of balance it out, right? So maybe you perform, instead of doing 3 or 4 lifting sessions per week, maybe you do 1 to 2 lifting sessions a week minimum, and then you can incorporate yoga into the other time that you were doing resistance training, right? Because I think it's still super important to put your body under load and resistance. So yoga, yes, it can be a form of resistance training in the sense that you are using your own body weight as resistance. If you are doing, yoga can be pretty hard, but I would say that your best bet will probably to have a combination of both. So maybe you incorporate 1 to 2 lifting sessions a week, and I would recommend probably doing like full body sessions if you're only doing 1 to 2 per week. Versus if you were, doing, 3 or 4, you could split those up into maybe like an upper or lower body split. But usually if it's 3 or less sessions per week, I would do a full body session, or I would incorporate full body training, because that makes sure that you're hitting a variety of muscle groups throughout the week. And it's probably going to be your best bet with that. So that's probably what I would recommend. Or you can cycle, maybe you cycle between, one time per week you do a resistance training, and then, 2 times per week you do yoga, and then the next week you do 2 resistance training sessions and 1 yoga session, and you kind of just cycle back and forth. That could be another option, but I wouldn't transition to just yoga. I would make sure you're at least having, 1 resistance session in per week. And we know that can still, like I mentioned in the study earlier, that can still definitely be advantageous to maintaining your muscle mass. So another thing is too, it takes a lot less to maintain muscle mass than it does to build muscle mass. So that's another thing to think about. If you have spent years, like as Kim said, spent years following a progressive overload program, you've been building muscle, and you've come to a point where maybe you just want to maintain your muscle, it actually takes a lot less to just maintain. So again, you can definitely do that, with 1 to 2 sessions per week, as long as they're programmed in a smart, structured way, and then also incorporate yoga, on top of that, or you can cycle through them. But that would be my recommendation. And yeah, hopefully that helped. Okay, the next question is from Sophia. I've been working out at home since the pandemic and enjoying strength training. According to the DEXA, I've gained about 2 pounds of lean muscle. I lift free weights that are challenging for me, but would eventually like to increase my weights with the barbell in the gym. My question is if this is a good way to go. I'm 46 and my back and knees and shoulders aren't the greatest. Can doing barbell work like squats and deadlifts be too much? I would get training on proper technique before I got started. Or do you think I should just stick with dumbbells? The bigger they are, the more cumbersome and harder to hold they get. I would love your advice. Thank you. I learned so much from your podcast. Well, I appreciate you listening, Sophia. This is another great question. First of all, congratulations on absolutely crushing it during quarantine and building muscle. That's amazing. You mentioned you gained 2 pounds of lean muscle mass, which is absolutely awesome. So props to you. What I would say is that in general, you can absolutely continue to make great progress with dumbbells, especially if there's just so many different ways to go with that, increasing obviously your dumbbells in the sense of weight, but there's so many different ways to progress with your training in terms of incorporating different techniques, like, not just, going through regular motions in terms of, when you're lifting, but you're thinking more so of incorporating like intensification techniques. So things like, slowing things down a bit, incorporating different pauses throughout your movements. There's so many different ways. I actually recorded a podcast on this a while back on like the different ways, if you only have a certain amount of dumbbells at home or a certain weight at home, there's so many different ways to kind of intensify that. So I will link that in the show notes. I went through like 10 different ways to do that. If you're at home, and this was back when quarantine first started. But yeah, so there's so many different ways to progress with dumbbells. And there's other ways you can add bands to that as well. So if you're interested in that, definitely check out that podcast that I recorded. I'll link it in the show notes. But there are, I would say, if you do have access to a barbell and you are going back to like a Globo gym or a gym and you have access to using barbells, I think that they can be beneficial just because it's a little bit easier to perform compound movements with a barbell, like squats and deadlifts. You can lift heavier usually, and it can be more, beneficial if you're looking to go down that route. What I would say is that if you haven't trained with a barbell before, or you're new to it, or you're kind of nervous, I would just take it slow. You definitely want to focus on, like Sophia said, learning technique first and making sure that your form is on point before you even put weight on the barbell. So if you're ever, just starting off, I would just start with the bar, using, usually with, at gyms, they have a 45-pound barbell. Some gyms have a 35-pound barbell. But I would just start with the bar. If you are, not sure on technique and you're not sure on kind of what you should be focusing on, then I would definitely maybe, get some help first, maybe have go through a few sessions with a trainer at your gym. Or what I like to do and recommend is making sure that when you're performing these exercises, that you're like, if you're squatting or deadlifting, that you film yourself so you can actually see what your form looks like, and then comparing that film to another form video. So watching videos on YouTube, or if you have a coach. So for example, for all of my clients, I have them send me form videos because I do online coaching. So I'm obviously not there with you in person, but I'll have my clients take videos of themselves performing the lifts, whether they're, deadlifts, squats, whatever it may be. They send me those videos and I give feedback on things that can be improved. So that's one way to go about it. You can hire a coach to help you with that, either online or, through your gym. But yeah, that's what I would say. And then also, like, for myself, I always film myself if I'm questioning my form and my technique, or if I just want to see where I can improve. And I'll also watch, YouTube videos on different form techniques. So that would be probably a good route to go. But I would say, you can for sure progress with dumbbells. But if you do want to try incorporating barbells, I think that that's absolutely, you should absolutely do that. Just make sure you're smart about it, and you are kind of, progressing in a way that you're making sure that you're focusing on your form and technique, and you're not just putting more and more weight on the bar and hoping for the best, because that tends to be a recipe for disaster. So yeah, that would be my recommendation is, try, if you're going back to the gym, try it out. Just make sure that you maybe ask for help, right? Don't be afraid to ask for help, especially for the first few times that you're using the barbell. And from there, as you continue to use it, you'll become more, it'll become less scary, I guess you can say. I know for me, the first time I picked up a barbell, I was like, what the heck am I doing? But I promise that, if you focus on form, you focus on technique, you ask for help, you record yourself, you watch YouTube videos for different form cues and techniques that you can emulate, then that is probably that would be my suggestion for that. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that helped. And let's get to the next question. All right, the last question is from Amanda. She said, curious how long someone can recomp for typically. I know this is quite individual. Also, is it better to focus on recomposition before going into a building or bulking phase? Okay, so let's just chat about what body recomposition is first, and then I want to dive into a few scenarios where it makes the most sense to focus on body recomposition versus, where it might not make sense to focus on body recomposition, and it might make more sense to go into a cutting cycle or a bulking or building cycle, which I'll talk about in a second. So body recomposition is typically characterized as eating around maintenance caloric intake while simultaneously building muscle and losing fat. So a quick example would be, say you, through a period of time, you lose 3 pounds of fat and you gain 3 pounds of muscle. In this scenario, body weight stays pretty much the same. So the scale isn't moving much. Maybe it fluctuates a little bit throughout that period of time, but at the end of, however many months it is, say you've lost 3 pounds and you've lost 3 pounds of fat and you've gained 3 pounds of muscle, that won't show up on the scale, but other metrics such as maybe your progress pictures, your body tape measurements, the way your clothes fit, those have all changed dramatically, and therefore your body has recomped. And this sounds great, right? This is literally you're building muscle and losing fat at the same time. This is what we all want. And it's absolutely possible. And I've seen it many times in my own coaching practice. But I would say that past a certain point, body recomp tends to become a very slow process. And when I say past a certain point, I mean that there are typically a few different scenarios where choosing body recomp as your goal makes sense. But outside of these scenarios, it probably makes sense to go through either a cutting cycle or a fat loss cycle, cutting and fat loss are the same thing. So either going through a fat loss cycle or a building or bulking cycle is what people call them, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But the scenarios where I'd say body recomposition focusing on body recomposition makes sense. So eating around caloric maintenance and focusing on building muscle and losing body fat at the same time. I'm going to list out the scenarios that I've seen this to happen most commonly, and then chat a little bit about the fat loss cycles and the building cycles as well. So these are the scenarios where it makes the most sense to focus on body recomposition. So the first one would be if you're relatively new to following a structured, smart, progressive training program. So this is what we call newbie gains. So if you've never followed like a structured, progressive program in terms of lifting, then you have the potential to recomp because you basically have what we call, you'll basically get what we call newbie gains, which is, you'll start following a progressive program that includes, focusing on progressive overload. It's structured in a smart way, and you'll be able to put on a significant amount of muscle while just eating at maintenance intake. So that would be the first scenario. The second scenario would be if you're coming back from like a long time of being off from training. So if you had an injury, or you've just maybe fallen off the wagon for, I would say like 6+ months. In that scenario, you're probably in a good position to recomp, because again, you've taken a long period of time off from training. The next scenario would be if you've been going to circuit style classes. So if you've been doing CrossFit, if you've been doing Orange Theory, F45, or similar classes like that for a while, and you haven't really focused on any, bodybuilding style training or hypertrophy style training at all, and you've really just been doing circuit style training, you do have the potential of body recomp because again, these are kind of all falling together in similar scenarios, but you'll have the potential to put on a good amount of muscle, because you'll be focused more so on actually going through a hypertrophy focus program versus going through circuit style training and things like CrossFit, Orange Theory, what I mentioned before. So that'd be another scenario. Another scenario would be if you're not considered underweight, right? So if you're considered underweight, it makes sense to probably put on some weight, or to go into a slight surplus to put on some weight, which will come with putting on more muscle. So if you're not considered underweight, or if you're not considered obese or overweight, so if you are considered overweight or obese, it probably makes sense to focus on fat loss first. And in both of those scenarios, you can technically recomp, which I'm going to talk about in a second, but it wouldn't be, at maintenance. So I know that's a little bit confusing. I'll talk about it in a second. So the next two scenarios, or the last two scenarios, would be if you've been severely under consuming protein. So if you know for sure that you've been eating like no protein and that's something that you can absolutely improve on, that would be a really good scenario because you'll be bumping your protein up. We know protein is super, super important for building muscle, maintaining muscle. So if you've been severely under eating protein, and if you bump your protein up to a good amount while focusing on following a progressive program, I think that you potentially definitely have the ability to recomp. And then the last scenario would be if you have the potential and the willingness to dramatically improve different biofeedback markers, like improving your sleep, your stress management, and your recovery protocols. So if you are sleeping like absolute crap, if you are stressed out to the max, if you're not recovering at all, that in itself is going to really, really hinder your results. So if you can improve those things dramatically, then you definitely have the ability to recomp. And that's what I've seen with a lot of my clients too, is we focus on recovery. We focus on, not doing cardio 24/7. We focus on getting stress in check, focus on sleep. Like if we start to improve all of these different areas, and that in itself will improve your results. So that's a lot of scenarios, right? So there is a great potential to recomp at maintenance. So if you fall into one or more of those categories, it probably makes sense to spend some time at maintenance and focus on getting dialed in those areas or many of those areas. And I would say if you are, struggling with this, or if you don't know where to start, then hiring a coach is definitely what I would recommend. That's what I did. And if you're interested in coaching with me, you can always apply on my website, metflexlife.com/apply. You'll get more information about one-on-one coaching and find out what that entails. But yeah, if you are struggling with that, or if you're struggling with any of those scenarios I mentioned, then hiring a coach to help you through this process is probably going to be a good idea. But if you don't fit into one of those categories that I mentioned, it probably makes more sense to direct your focus to either a gaining or a cutting phase. The reason for this is because, if you're trying to do two things at the same time, building muscle and losing body fat, by definition, you're doing neither most effectively. Again, this is, after you've gone through all those scenarios. So if you are outside of those scenarios, if you are more advanced, if you've been lifting for a while, following a progressive overload program for a while, if you are, not severely overweight or underweight, if you fall into any of the categories I just mentioned, then it might make sense to focus on one thing at a time, right? And the reason is because, like I said, if you're trying to do two things at once, it's probably not going to be as effective as if you're focusing on one thing at a time, right? So if you're more advanced, seeing visual progress from the combination of the muscle that you're gaining and the fat that you're losing generally takes a pretty long time to see, and sometimes it can be demotivating. So going through like gaining and cutting cycles would probably be the next, would probably be the best thing to do. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. But basically, what gaining and cutting cycles entail, they're characterized by just periods of, with gaining would be eating more, right? Being in the surplus, and then eating at maintenance, and then eating less or being in a deficit, and then eating at maintenance, and then rinsing and repeating. So you're basically cycling between these different goals, and then over a period of time, you're building muscle and you're losing fat instead of doing them at the same exact time, which would be body recomp. So again, if you fall outside of any of those scenarios that I mentioned, right, mainly if you're more advanced and you've been doing this for a while, then it probably makes sense to go through, to go into either a cutting cycle or a gaining cycle. And let's just really quickly define, a fat loss or a cutting cycle and a gaining cycle, just so we're on the same page there. Because the second part of this question was, is it better to recomp before bulking? So I kind of answered that in the sense of those scenarios that I mentioned, but let's just quickly go through, what the different cycles entail. And then I also want to talk about what I meant before when I said that body recomposition can technically still happen in a fat loss phase and a building phase, but it's not at maintenance. So I would say that's not it's a little bit confusing, but let me just chat about this and it'll make a little bit more sense. So in a fat loss phase, that is characterized by a period of time where you're eating below maintenance calories. So you're in a deficit and you're pushing for fat loss while trying to maximize lean body mass retention. That would be the main goal. Pushing for fat loss and maximizing the ability to maintain as much muscle as possible. That's what we would want. That would be the ideal scenario in a fat loss phase. Can you gain muscle in a deficit in a fat loss phase? Absolutely. But like I said, the more advanced you are with training and the leaner you are or the leaner you become, the harder it is to put on muscle in a deficit. Conversely, the more body fat and less training experience you have, the more likely you'll be able to gain muscle in a fat loss phase. So technically, this would be considered body recomposition, but because weight will still be lost overall and you are in a deficit, I personally define it as falling into a cutting category. But regardless of your training experience, if you're overweight and you're carrying a lot of body fat, choosing to go into a fat loss phase would probably make the most sense. So that would be a fat loss phase, and then a muscle gaining phase or a building phase, or whatever you want to call it, is characterized by a period of time where you're eating above maintenance calories or you're in a slight surplus and you're pushing for optimal muscle gain. So if your primary goal is to build muscle, you're gonna have to gain weight. Obviously, again, if you're outside of those scenarios that we talked about. Gaining muscle requires building new tissue and therefore requires the scale to increase. This took me a long time to come to terms with, but it makes sense. If you want to put on muscle tissue, you have to see the scale go up. Again, if you're outside of those scenarios I talked about. For most people, building muscle in a slight surplus will also come with a little bit of fat gain. That's just typically how it works. There is one caveat to this, and it's something that we call, lean gains in the fitness world. It's called lean gains, and this occurs when you build muscle while body fat stays relatively the same. So in this scenario, body weight is actually increasing, but it's coming primarily from muscle. So although the scale is going up, your body fat percentage is actually decreasing, and you appear leaner because you're building muscle and body fat isn't changing much. So technically, this would also be considered body recomp, but because you are gaining weight, it is still characterized as quote unquote gaining. So in reality, a lean gain scenario where the weight you're gaining is coming 100% from muscle tends to be pretty rare unless you are in a very, very small surplus or you're completely new to training and you're starting at a lower body fat percentage. So again, for the majority of people entering a gaining phase and going into surplus, both muscle and fat tissue will accumulate over time. But if you approach this in a way that's very smart and you have a game plan and you embrace the long-term outcome, you'll realize how beneficial it can actually be. And I've personally been going through this myself, and it's been an absolute game changer. And I wish I was educated on this a long time ago. So also realize too, one thing to mention is that the process of gaining muscle is a lot slower than the process of losing body fat. So this means that if you are going into a gaining phase, it's going to take a lot more time, and it requires a lot more patience typically than in a fat loss phase. So that would be kind of I just wanted to go through the different scenarios with the fat loss phase and the gaining phases, because within those phases, yes, technically recomp can happen, but by the general definition of body recomposition is losing body fat and gaining muscle at the same time while you're at maintenance caloric intake. So you're consuming maintenance calories. With the other scenarios, you're either in a deficit or you're in a surplus. And yes, you can technically recomp, but you're still either losing weight or gaining weight. So that would be, considered in each of those categories. So anyway, that's a little bit in the weeds of things, but the biggest benefit I would say of going through these cycles, with going through fat loss phase cycles, going through gaining phase cycles, is that they're faster. So you're choosing one goal at a time and optimizing for that specific goal. So you'll be gaining muscle at the most effective rate and then cutting at the most effective rate, and basically just rinsing and repeating until basically you're happy with your physique. And this can occur over years. You can continue to do this over many years, over weeks, months, and years. You'll likely see better progress going through these cycles, especially if you get more advanced versus pushing for body recomposition. So another thing too, last thing to mention is within these cycles, you will get more tangible results. So if you're focused primarily on building muscle, you're going to see strength and muscle gain faster and more tangibly than if you're trying to recomp, and vice versa. If you're in a cut, you'll see fat loss come faster than you would if you were focused on recomping. So I know that was a long-winded answer, but I just wanted to make sure I kind of brought you through the different scenarios and then brought you through what body recomposition actually means at maintenance, and then also within a fat loss phase and then within a muscle building phase. But basically, body recomposition is, at maintenance sounds really, really awesome, but the downside is you may not see or feel tangible results for a while if you don't fall into any of those categories I mentioned. And more so if you're more advanced, it would probably make more sense to go through different bulking or building cycles and fat loss cycles. So hopefully that made sense. And if you want to learn a little bit more about body recomposition, I actually recorded 2 podcasts with guests who are experts in this area. So I will link those in the show notes, but they are episode 71, titled Lose Fat and Build Muscle with Christopher Barakat, and then episode 45, The Science of Body Recomposition with Dr. Bill Campbell. If you haven't listened to those already, I would definitely check those out. Going into a lot lot more detail within body recomposition. So if you're interested in that, I will link those in the show notes. All right, that's all we have for today. Again, a quick shout out to our sponsor for the podcast in February, Livesavage Apparel and Ketobrick. They're sponsoring all of the Friday episodes for the month of February. Definitely check them out. I will link the website in the show notes. You can check out the Ketobricks, and you can also check out their apparel line. Next week, I will give info on their apparel launch. They have a super exciting launch coming up on Valentine's Day, I believe it is. So I will let you know more info about that next week. And then also, if you entered the Active Stacks giveaway, I just announced the winners in the intro of this episode. So I'll announce those really quickly again. The first winner was AEH008. The second winner was Meg Her, so MEGHER2. And the third winner was Loveland 2031. So if you won, if that's your username on iTunes, please make sure to send me an email at Rachel@metflexlife.com with your full name and your shipping info so we can get you your prizes. And that's all I have for you today. As always, if you're enjoying the podcast, please make sure to share it out on social media. If you can leave a review on iTunes, a rating review, that would be awesome. That helps the show rank higher and helps more people see it when they're searching for podcasts to listen to. And I'd be super appreciative of that. And if you do want to check out my website, I have lots of information up there. You can apply for coaching there. You can see all the previous podcast episodes. I have free recipes, tons of stuff. So you can go to metflexlife.com for that. And if you have questions for the podcast, definitely make sure you sign up for my newsletter so you can sign up for the newsletter and then also reply to the newsletter each Friday with any questions that you have, and I will answer them on the podcast. All right, I'll chat with you next time.